there's a number of disability presentations, right? It's really emerging, I think, in an Indonesian context, I'm noticing, because we've got fantastic PhD students coming to work with us, right? But in other ways, colleagues are working. But the concepts are quite different. But the theory is so dominated still by theories from the US, from the UK, from Australia, from the Nordic countries, although Global South disability has been going on. But I think the specificity of that is really different. Like in Australia, we talk about disability rights. There's probably a rights discourse in Indonesia. In countries like Singapore, not so keen on talking about rights, right? It's more about inclusion. So you've got different political cultures, you've got different linguistic concepts. So I think in disability, you've got that going on. I think in the technology area, it intersects, but we did this work about 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, called Global Histories of Internet, because we were working about the internet in the 90s and even now. And there's an assumption that then the ideas of the American internet, I'm being simplistic, that's how the internet happened elsewhere, right? A bit like concepts like Gen Z, that it just works that way everywhere. Whereas I think what we thought was, no, that's not the case. You do have a global technology like mobile phones, but they're made in different places. There's different geographies, there's different markets, and people do different things with them. There is a learning across them, right? You might have protests in one country and you're getting sent things from another country, might be Malaysia to Indonesia. But you need to understand that, right? You need to actually appreciate that. And also that theory is just not coming one direction. I mean, this seems so obvious, right? But I think in the technology area, there's a real thing that this is how we understand AI, and this is how we conceptualize it within communications, even now. Whereas like, well, but how does that work in a country as diverse as, say, Indonesia, right? Or a region like Southeast Asia? So part of what we're interested in, and from this work we did on Asian Internet histories 15 years ago, was working with colleagues in those languages, recognizing the work they published in the languages and the theorization and what's the experiences and trying to surface that. So that's kind of, I've raved on a bit, but that's part of the interest and just feeling like even in the mobiles area where there's a lot of scholarship, it represented at the conference. Still, I don't think there's a great deal of bringing together the scholarship on, say, digital Southeast Asia. I could be wrong, and you can tell me, but that's my sense. There's pockets in, say, Malaysia, in Singapore, coming through in Indonesia, but thinking across them in a very diverse region is not really being done in this way with a more interesting comparative approach and taking seriously things like the influence of decolonizing theory, the influence of, say, feminist thought that Profiter is talking about, other kinds of thinking. So that's kind of it gives you a bit of a flavor of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Looking forward for the discussion. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Super sweet. So now our next up, Miss Yasmin Mulia.
Okay, before that, is my voice clear enough?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, so I'd love to address my question for Professor Gerard. Before that, thank you, Professor Gerard. It was such an amazing thing to know more about mobile products and its impact environmentally. But this piqued my interest though. I've read this book by Craig Hatterington. It is such an interesting book, Infrastructure, Environment, and Life in the Anthropocene, where it mostly talks about how everything made in this world surrounds the need of human especially. And in this case, I do consider that mobile product is pretty problematic if not well regulated, if I could say. Like it could be a disaster to both human and environment if we don't have a specific regulation, or we have this mobile-centered society that clearly talks about the regulation itself. My question is pretty simple, like how far social humanities could intervene in the impact of this use of mobile products in our society, like how we could manage the risk of mobile product usage in the future, because you couldn't just tell people to just don't use phones or don't use mobile products bluntly to people around you. So that's my question.
Thank you so much. I might have just missed a little bit of it, and I don't know that book, so I'll have to go and have a look at it. Could you just repeat the last bit of the question, Yasmin, if that's okay? Because it was just a little echoey.
Oh yeah, the last question is like how we could manage the risk of mobile product usage in the future, because like we cannot just tell people around us to stop using mobile products.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, look, great question. And as I said, I feel like I'm in early days to do it. And part of what you mentioned was perhaps the infrastructure concept, right? That I think part of the what's going on in this area is people trying to recognize the way that you've got a complex set of things coming together to provide infrastructures that have this human and more than human dimensions as well. So I think the starting point is in people's everyday lives and how they're using the technology, right? And understanding that and going back to understand with them, how do they see this happening, right? Because I suspect they have ideas about this because they've got environmental, ecological consequences for this happening. And part of this is a dilemma for perhaps many of us thinking, well, if I can, on a very superficial level, I can leave my mobile phone at home. I did it one day and thought, this is great. I'm a mobile phone scholar. It's very hard to study non-use. I'd love this. Got to work, had to do two-factor authentication and went no further. But I think you do in what you're pointing out, there's a lot of people who, some may have varying levels of usage, right? So I think understanding this continuum is really important. And then I think working with people and communities to understand more of it. But I think some of it is easy. Like I think we have a playbook in a way, like recycling and repair. And if you're not thinking across the life cycle, if you're not designing for actually people being able to do sustainable practices or working with them around it, that's a problem. If you don't have infrastructures to support recycling, my colleagues have done this work in their areas, suburbs of Sydney, where the university is and where I live. Say, look, if you want to recycle your bike, how do you do that, right? Are you a sort of nerd who watches YouTube videos and, goes for it? Or are there recycling centres? And recycling centres are really important community infrastructures. So I think there's these things that people don't exist in a vacuum. And if you don't put that infrastructure in, it's hard for them to actually make these choices. So part of it is probably opening up choices for people, right? And understanding people's different life worlds. And I think that's an important part of it. But I think part of the problem I find with technology is there's a narrowing of vision, right? The narrowing to say, look, this is what you have to, this is the technology you need, right? Without any regard for the fact that what's happening in that technology might be really problematic. Our issues with much social media, online harms at the moment, right? Trying to deal with social media moderation, people have been trying to do for years, and there's all sorts of terrible content on it, right? And so on the environmental level, I think that governance piece is important. But it's a great question, and so I'm sure you've got other things to say yourself.
Thank you so much, Professor Jared.
Super. Muhammad Zaki, do you have a question for Prof. Gerard or for Dr. Fitri?
For Mrs. Fitri.
Okay, go ahead.
First of all, I'm sorry if my English isn't very clear. I'm Muhammad Zaki Fareza Firdaus, and this question is for Mrs. Fitri. May I ask, could you please elaborate on the inherent challenges and vulnerabilities of the inclusive leadership model, especially when dealing with diverse and potentially conflicting stakeholder agendas? Thank you.
If I'm rephrasing this correctly, you ask whether or not there is vulnerability, sorry, vulnerability of women leadership. Is it women leadership? What was it, Pak Omar? Can you help a little bit, please?
The challenges for inclusive leadership.
For
The inclusive leadership, the challenges in Indonesia.
especially when you're dealing with a lot of marginalized community, blah blah blah. Okay, probably. Please ask in Indonesia if I didn't answer your questions correctly. So the challenges for inclusive leadership. Yes, of course. First, when we are talking about leadership itself, we almost always, I mean, I don't say all, but most likely we will assume leadership is equitable with, it's the same with heroic individualism. It is the same with being rational. It is the same with being able to achieve goals as soon as possible. It is the same with basically what I call as masculine rationality, that really tough, that really have to do leadership in certain ways, making people that are not within these dominant spaces are disadvantaged because people will not think them as someone who are worthy of leadership. For instance, if you think, well, in Bahasa Indonesia, we got pemimpin harus mengayomi. Leaders have to be protecting others. While we know that the word protecting means that oftentimes we say in Indonesia, we say father is a protective figure. So that's why if you are a woman, there is an underlying stereotypical belief that you cannot protect others. In that way, the challenges lies in the way we think and talk about leadership itself. Because when we think, we cannot we cannot be inclusive in our leadership if we are not making sure that our leadership is opening up to different ways of leading. So that's one. Okay. And then what happened when we are not inclusive? What happened when we continues with our masculine domination of leadership, with our masculine constructions of leadership? What's going to happen? What's going to happen is that there are certain groups of people that are being advantaged, and there are a lot of others that are disadvantaged. And these people are vulnerable communities that usually don't have spaces to have voices, and they don't even have a courage probably to talk about what's going on by being, because this kind of tropes, masculine, rational, don't really care about other aspects of leadership that are needed. For example, the aspect of care, the ethics, the social responsibility. Well, it is oftentimes it is overlooked if we just glorify leadership from one point of view. So that's how it creates even more vulnerability to the broader society. I'm not sure whether this is answering your question. Please feel free to clarify if you ask about other things and I answer about the other thing.
Do you want to clarify?
That's a very insightful perspective, Mrs. Fitri. I really appreciate how you connect leadership with the idea of dominant value like masculinity, rationality. It gives me a deeper understanding how inclusive leadership need to challenge those traditional assumptions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question.
Super. So I do have some question for both of you, but I'm not going to take that. I'm going to let the audience first, then me, of course. This has been an interesting discussion so far. Are there any more questions from the audience? Just raise your hand. Well, raise your hand digitally, of course. Or you can also type in your question in the chat. You can do that in both Bahasa Indonesia or English. I'll try to translate my best. Okay, while we wait for people to think about their question, I'd like to ask a question first for Dr. Fitri. This has been a lingering question, actually. So in Indonesia, where the dominant religious teachings often position man, as the natural leader, I have a friend, a very capable female, and she's also a leader in a very good position in one of Indonesia's public services. So despite her professional success, she still expressed a personal preference for male leadership. She even chose to remain single because she felt she couldn't find a man worthy of being her leader. So this is a fascinating example of how deeply entrenched these normative preferences to be, right? So I'd like to know your opinion about this.
I think thank you very much. And I'm working in what do you call it? PhD Mama Indonesia is like a digital platform to promote equality for women to to go further with their education. And that kind of thing is something that we talk a lot about, because for a lot of women, they are actually afraid of getting higher educations because they feel that men are not going to approach them because they will, well, men will find me intimidating, will find me blah blah blah. Well, this is like the other way around, right? Like it seems like I agree with you that there is a like how deeply entrenched patriarchy in our society, and also the fact that she thinks that men have to have male leadership over her in the domestic life rather than have a mutual partnership based on collaboration and based on respect, right? And this is also something that is very interesting because in our politics, women's representations is less than, never goes beyond 22%, while half of Indonesia's population are women. This shows that women don't choose other women, right? We don't believe that women can lead a social change. So I agree with you that this is such a deep entrenched belief that men have to be leaders. And even, this is probably shocking for Jared, in the law of marriage, it's explicitly say that when you get married, men are the leader of the family and you're supposed to become the main breadwinner, while women must take care of the family. This law was created, I think it was 1973 or something, and was reused in revised in 2017, 18, but they kept that thing there. It means like there is nobody challenge, like how do the states regulates my family? There is no challenge against that. So that's how Indonesian, like this kind of belief is not just our belief, but also it is institutional, deeply institutionalized in the way we live, in the way we teach our students, in the educations, and it is very, very hard to challenge if we're not thinking, differently about this issue. But thank you very much for that insight. Not very good. Not
Yeah.
very good reality.
Yeah. I've been wanting to ask that question to someone
Yeah.
who actually works in who legitly works in in this area. Um, but yeah. So I'm going to leave to give the audience another chance. If not, I have a question for Gerard. But our audience wants to ask a question now. Miss Ardelia, go ahead, please.
Okay. Before that, I'm so sorry. I can turn on my camera because I don't know why. But are my voice clear enough?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask from both of Mrs. Fitri and Professor Gerard's perspective and experience. I heard this from a webinar that there's always a general question for women with career, that there will always someone that question whether that women will choose family or career, and somehow that question only applies to women with career and business women, as if a man's responsibility is just themselves and a woman's responsibility is themselves and their family. Have you faced those kind of question, and how did you answer to them? Thank you.
I guess it's for both of you, and I think we're gonna have like two point of view here, from a man and from a woman, to this question. Would you like to go first for the man's perspective, Professor Gerard?
Happy to dive in the deep end if that's appropriate, but thanks so much, Adelia. Yes, I mean, clearly is the case, and I'll be deferring to Fitri to hear more. But I think, look, I mean, I suppose I've been tried to uh, how shall I say, acknowledge that, but I do find it really hard because of probably who I am, where I come from, the privilege. I did a PhD. Actually, my background's in English literature, and I did a PhD on 18th, 19th century English literature. And I studied the Romantic poets, including Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Mary Wollstonecraft. And Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote the early pieces on, feminism and so on. So I mean, that's that a bit of a roundabout way of saying that. I mean, one of the things I've tried to do, maybe as an academic from early in career, is try and foreground the importance of the diverse approaches to caring that people might have in their lives. Does that make sense? To say in a workplace, like, so when my partner was pregnant with our first child, actually, I hope she wouldn't mind me saying, she didn't have a full-time job. So she didn't have access to leave, maternity leave. There was probably an expectation that she would do that. And for paternity leave, in my case, there was 2 weeks at the University of Queensland where I know Fitri's had experience as well. But I was lucky to have a boss, and he said, take the time you need. But it's still an informal thing. And I think there's an expectation. And then schemes around in Australia, there's been a tendency to have for people to be able to, particularly women and gender diverse people, to be able to go on conferences who might have caring responsibilities, to pay for that. And then I felt a bit conflicted about that, particularly when I was a senior man, to say, well, should I be going for that? And I think others in my family felt, well, that's a problem because you go to conference and who looks after the children, right? So I think those kind of questions, felt like I should try and foreground in conversations and in policies, to say that a whole bunch of people, particularly men, have an expectation that they are struggling with. I struggle with this, I think, with academic workloads. And I know in the Australian context, they're nothing like the workloads that you face in an Indonesian context, right? And I felt like when I was more senior, and we started a research centre, myself and Catherine Lumby, a famous Australian feminist academic. We had young kids, so we just brought them in because we were a research centre and we could. And so I thought the least we could do is to just foreground that, right? And to have men involved and then mentoring younger men who have done a much better job than I have. They've taken more time off. I think actually I felt a bit worried unconsciously about taking time off about parenting. So I've just tried to share in response to your questions to try and be a bit open about some of that, because I think combating that gendering of it is a really complex thing. But I can see a lot of people doing it from different perspectives. People queer parenting, and I know that's another issue around diverse sexualities that intersects with religious views in Australia, where we've had laws passed, Fitri, you're probably aware of, that were also quite normative, right? And so I think that's in the mix as well, to say the caring cuts everywhere, and it's in everyone's interest to try and combat this normalization. I hope that's useful. Yeah.
Now, Dr. Fitri.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think one of the things, I'll just continue from pick up from Jared. So one of the things that we should do as a society is normalize or denormalize first. Denormalize that division, that strict division labor in our society. That was what creates it at the first place, right? That women are assigned in such a way and men are assigned in such a way. It's even put in our one of the laws in Indonesia, which is insane. That means I'm transgressing all of the laws are doing a lot of women in this university and other university because we are working. We don't really take care of our family. I always bring my sons here every afternoon because Indonesia doesn't have a childcare. I mean, doesn't have like in Australia. I know that in Australia you have plenty of childcares. I mean, it's hard to get into because of the high demands, but at least you got a childcare, and in Australia you also have the benefits, right, for family. If I'm not mistaken, Jared, you have benefits, a certain kind of benefits to help you to pay for the childcare fee because it's very, very expensive. At least in Queensland, I experienced that, and I got a scholarship from Australian government, so they treated me like an Australian. So I got this huge discount fee because as a PhD student, I was very poor. I mean, we were all pretty poor for the Australian standard. So it got huge discount that really helped because I can go studying from morning to from morning to the afternoon. I can take up a lot of additional job, research job, and my husband can take his casual job freely because we have this childcare. And I think it is something that the government of Indonesia needs to pay attention to. If we want to denormalize it, I think the government should take part, provide childcare, accessible childcare to support both men and women at the workplace, to provide paternity leaves, probably with the same numbers of days with maternity leave. Here we have, I think, around 2 months of maternity leaves, but 3 days for paternity leaves. And last year there was actually debates whether or not we want to increase the number of days for paternity leaves, but there were a lot of backlashes, especially from industry, saying that, well, if we let the men go for the paternity leaves, then who's going to go to work because they're going to have a lack of productivity. So productivity here is measured in a very masculine way. So, oh my God, something wrong with the way we teach our business classes. That's what I think. So paternity leave is something that should also be normalized and also supported by the government. Like a lot of Scandinavian countries have this very long paid paternity leaves that normalizes, I don't know what they call it, coffee debt or something like that. Like basically dads who take the leave from their workplace and then spend time with their children. Not only that, it is important for the family, for the family dynamics to do that, but also at the workplace, it can also balance the level playing field because men usually don't have the caring responsibility. They can go this way, but women have to stop, especially when you have, I don't know, like 5 children. You have to stop 5 times. That means there is no really equal base merits here, right? So that's one thing. So government should really take part in this. And then there are a lot of in social media, and I'm very proud of that. New men, new masculinity, or something like that. I forgot the name. So basically, there are a group of fathers and dad that really pay attention. That they say that, okay, this is our responsibility too. Because I think 2 years ago there was a backlash against a male celebrity, who announced that I would take a day off because my child was just got a bullying at his school and stuff like that. But then I would just step back from my career and focusing on my family. We would have thought, wow, such a great dad. But the comment sections really, really rude and saying that, why do you should leave it to your wife? Where's your wife? You should be going to work instead. Why do you have to spend time? Where's the mother? Blah, 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 blah. So, so I think contra narratives in social media can also be very useful to combat all of these dominant narratives about strict roles between men and women, and as well as the education materials from childhood education. I was surprised when the first time I moved back from Australia to Indonesia, my son went to the first grade, and I looked at the book, and the book really shows a lot of pictures of men and women and family doing stuff. But there was actually a question saying that father's hobbies are ABC, and the correct answer is reading newspaper, and mother's hobbies are and the correct answer will be cooking. Isn't that crazy? And he was asking me, Mommy, why is in this house is flipped? Because the one who likes to cook is my husband. I like to read newspaper. So I think the way we embed our education, the way we rethink to educate, it's part of our life. It is such a regular thing that people fail to notice, but it goes into children's brain, and it will go forward into, I don't know, adulthood and the way they see the world. I think that's for me. And thank you for the question, Adelia.
Super answer from both of our speakers. But unfortunately, we are left with 1 minute in time. So I need to close this. It has been a very nice presentation and also nice discussion. Well, I could say Dr. Fitri basically talks about how we need to shift our perspective about leadership so that we could incorporate both feminine and also masculine POV of leadership, so it's more balanced out. Prof. Gerard talks about AI has a complex impact for not just the society or not just for us as human being, but also our ecological environment. It also, although I think it was implicitly stated, impacted also inequalities such as digital commodification, if I understood it correctly, and technological dependence on big companies. At least as we see, all of those AI from Oppo, Apple, and so on. I thank the audience also for participating in our discussion. It has been really great, but unfortunately, time is up and we have to say goodbye. I'm gonna leave this to, I think, the MC again. I think, is the MC here, or should I just close it for this session?
Can I just jump in and say terima kasih banyak and to say
Of
thank you
course,
so
of
much.
course. Go ahead, Gerard.
Thank
Go
you so
ahead.
much to Fitri, but to Prof. Omar, thank you so much and great to see you again. And to those participating and questioning in the committee, I'm really appreciative.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Bu Fitri, any last words?
No, I'm thinking. I mean, I'm sorry, Gerard. I know you were here last 2 weeks ago, right? And I apologize, I couldn't see you, but it could have been nice. But hopefully, we can meet somewhere in the
Yeah.
future. Yeah.
Sampai jumpa.
Thank you so much.
That'd be
Sampai
great.
jumpa. Yeah, and thank you to all participants, and thank you also, Pak Omar, for moderating the session.
Okay, so I wish you goodbyes.
Bye.
All right, thank you, Professor Gerard, Dr. Fitri, and also Dr. Omar for such an insightful yet very relatable topic, wasn't it, Erha?
Yes.
Yes, I think that's the beauty of studying communication science or strategic communications, where everything that we see theoretically, everything that we learn theoretically can really relates to our everyday basis. And Dr. Fitri has mentioned that, do you realize it that each of our topic in the class is actually very like, and ladies and gentlemen, participants, we have just concluded such a beautiful keynote. And I would like you guys to come.
Peserta telah keynote dan setelah istirahat.
Thank you. Oke. Kenceng banget Y-nya di bawah. Yeay. Makasih Mbak Mega.